I'm with a donkey. Somehow I got to hear Right Here, Right Now demo from Jesus Jones. So I said to Londonbeat, I'm sorry guys, I've just got to take time out and do this. I love the sound element of music making and music production. I love getting into the nitty gritty of it. There's something Morten said, a track's always got to make you smile somewhere, which is a little bit with Hello. What had infused his weekend sort of came out in the tracks during the week, so we're able to sort of harmonize that into their kind of indie sound. You know, the idea of the platonic solids. They're out there in the universe somewhere. There's a perfect cube and there's a perfect tetrahedron. Down here on the 3D, we don't get the perfection, but out there is perfection that can be ascribed to.
Martyn Phillips was really riding a wave in the early 90s. I've been thinking about you from Londonbeat, Right Here, Right Now from Jesus Jones, and The Beloved, of course, with Hello and the Sun Rising. Now, Martyn's a really introspective guy. He's intelligent and he knows a lot about sound and what it does with our bodies. This interview is a bit of a slow burn, to be quite honest, but it's an amazing interview because the more we get in depth, the more interesting it gets. So stick with it. This is Martyn Phillips. So Martyn Phillips, welcome. I mean, one thing I want to sort of go straight into, because it's the thing you mentioned in the email to me, which connects us, which is this party, the Londonbeat Jimmy Helms birthday party, which was, it was quite an event.
It was all the Librans. It was, yes, because Jimmy Helms and Willie Henschel from the band, and then their manager Sandra Turnbull were all Librans, and there may have been someone else as well. So it was a little hop around London on 2 double-decker buses to all these different everyone's flats and houses, where we just have a quick drink before getting called back onto the bus with the cry, "I'm with a donkey."
Brilliant. To be honest, I remember getting on that bus, and then within about 10 minutes, because you're trying to drink on a double-decker bus, which is, not the easiest thing in the world. And at first I was sort of concerned, okay, the alcohol's going to go all over me. And then after about 10 minutes, it was like, sod it. This is it for the whole evening. And it was a brilliant party.
It was great, yeah, memorable.
So I want to start off with your childhood, because I always find it fascinating the early life of people and how that sort of influenced what they were going to do. So what sort of music were you surrounded by when you were young?
So my mum was, she was a singing teacher. She was trained in London. So she was teaching singing, and then later on clarinet as I was growing up. Then she picked up the cello in her later years. So she was running around the house singing, which is a lovely thing to hear. But we didn't have much recorded music. I mean, I said most of what I was listening to, I think, was off 78 in those days. So I had a really quite an unpop background, and of course we lived in Oxford, and you couldn't get Radio 1 at all there. You get a bit of Radio 2 because it was the Chilterns sort of were shielding the transmitter, so we could get a bit of Radio 2 and again some other stations or something. But I pined for listening to some pop music, which occasionally you could get on from Radio 1. So it wasn't really until I had a French exchange at the age of 13 or 14 or something like that, and he came over obviously from France, where records were more expensive. So he went out and spent all his pocket money on a bunch of records, which is King Crimson and Court of the Kings and King, and Genesis selling England by the pound, and I think Deep Purple, Made in Japan. So there's some classic progressive rock and rock track albums. And my parents then had just bought a new hi-fi with some headphones. So I was actually kind of blown away at this age, listening to all these sounds on these new headphones. And that was kind of a turning point for me.
But with your mum being a singing teacher and also playing the clarinet, I guess that having, let's say, having musical instruments around the house, having someone who is a musician and a teacher around the house would have influenced you to be musical yourself.
I think so. There was yes. I mean, I was learning piano up until an age, and then I was learning viola all through school, and then I didn't pick it up for many years after that, but play it now. Um, and then my sister was learning flute, and my dad had a go at the trombone, but he wasn't really into it. So there was quite a lot of music floating around. Uh, I think there's probably more music than chat. My dad was uh, he's very, but he was a university lecturer and he was a don. So his way of addressing people would be to broadcast something, tell you what the information was, and then withdraw from the conversation. There was very little repartee in terms of our conversation. So I suppose music was a kind of retreat and a safe haven, I think.
How did
Uh,
they view creativity, though? Because if I think of my parents, who weren't musical at all, but they would really say to me that, like creativity, an area of creativity isn't a place to go because it won't actually provide you with money that you need in your life.
I just wanted to do it. I mean, I was sort of hammering away on the piano, just playing over the same chord progressions and making a dreadful racket for ages. Um, and it was, I think, I had a pretty miserable school time for some of my school life, and it was really kind of music that saved me. Age 13, 14, I met up with there was one guitarist, and I decided I was going to start playing bass, and I just lived for a sort of little jam we'd have in the break time, or we'd get together with a drummer on Saturday evening and play in the music rooms, and that's really what I lived for.
I mean, did you feel a bit of an outsider at school? Because if I think about what music provided for me when I was a teenager, and obviously, I became a teenager in '72, which was, the Bowie era. And Bowie represented a world where I felt I could belong. And my parents' world wasn't the world of belonging. So I'm just wondering that if you had a sort of same sense of feeling of belonging through music when you didn't feel like you maybe belonged when you were in school.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you've expressed it perfectly there. uh, what to add to that? Yes, it was kind of uh, my my safe space, my happy thoughts. Um, yeah, enjoying playing more than relating. Yes, I suppose because I was very young for my year. I was good at maths, so they put me up a year, and I was quite young for the year anyway. So I was the youngest person in the year. So everyone was going through different life stages in amongst my peers. So it was quite lonely.
Mentioned to me in the email in your bio about the formative moments in your early life, and you mentioned three: having tea with J.R.R. Tolkien, guiding the poet laureate John Betjeman on a tour, and performing with Hugh Laurie, which I think must have come later when you were at Oxford. But certainly, those, if they provided formative moments in your early life, what was formative about each one of those?
So, well, actually, I mean, Hugh Laurie, I kind of slipped him in because I don't. He was that was actually at my primary school. I don't actually remember him, but we made a record of the musical that we were in. It was a musical that was specially written for the school, so we all sort of got on board, and I think we were both in the chorus. So, and it was years later when another school friend of mine who got back in touch pointed out that we were actually at the same school at the same time, and I think, I must be on the same production as Hugh Laurie. So I looked, and there he was, but I don't actually remember him at all. So I just sort of put that in as passing. John Betjeman. So that was my 13th birthday. I'd just done my exams, and they needed some. He wanted to have a look around his old school, which is where we were. So I gave him a little tour, and he was a lovely chap. And walked terribly slowly, if I seem to remember. So we were sort of inching across the playing fields, and I was trying to think of something intelligent to say to him. So that was nice. And then Tolkien. So Tolkien was he was another fellow at as one of the dons at the college where my father was. So they used to see each other at lunch every day, and I was engrossed in Lord of the Rings at that time and loving it. And so my dad, bless him, did a little bit of nepotism and said, you wouldn't mind just meeting up with my son and just having a quick word with him. So I went round to his rooms, had a cup of tea, and he signed my copy of Lord of the Rings, which I've still got, very, very moth-eaten and much used. And he was very Donish. And again, it was very sort of awkward, awkward to a little young teenager and this Don trying to relate to each other. But bless him, he did actually make the time to meet me. So that was quite special. And he was getting on then, so I don't think he lasted much longer than that. So it was I think my dad was one of the last people who kind of knew him. And there was I think shortly before he died, there was a Swedish TV company came and interviewed him as kind of the last connection to the Lord of the Rings saga.
So you got a scholarship to Oxford and you studied in engineering science. So when you went to Oxford, what did you envision as your future, and how did Oxford change the trajectory of your career?
Well, I was sponsored by ICI. They gave me they said, so I went and worked for them at the Casnakelna chlorine plant on Merseyside, which, bless you, ICI is a pretty grim place. It's smells of chlorine and beds of mercury and such like. So even though it was a decent training job, I realised that wasn't the life for me. So they did actually offer me the job at the end of it, but I said thank you very much, but no thanks. So I went on the dole for a bit and then had a bunch of little jobs, and just kind of music was in my blood, and I think I got the bug because there's a very tatty little studio that the university had with a couple of little boxy Auratones to listen to and a tiny little mixing desk, and I did a few sessions there and just got the bug. A friend of mine had a couple of synthesizers, and another friend, Tom Green, who I've gotten back in touch with recently, he had a Wasp synthesizer and an MS-20, one of them, and the Wurlitzer. He used to play in a band called Dum Dum Dum, and they're amazing. They really were extraordinary. He was he was like doing the Keith Emerson, pulling the Wurlitzer on top of him and such like. And then he ended up doing lots of programming for the Orb later on. So he stayed with synthesis. So he really switched me on to synthesizers. He was in the same college. And so when I left, there was a job going for fixing synthesizers for the Electronic Dream plant, which is just outside Oxford. And there's these, I just happen to have one right here, little Blue Peter thing. So it's these chaps, these Wasp synthesizers. I used to fix these and modify them. Had a little mod there that makes very bell-like noises. So I did that for a while. And that was quite fun. And then shortly after...
Well, while you were doing that, just to sort of talk about that, because if you're actually, modifying synthesizers and fixing them, you're finding out every aspect out of a synthesizer, I presume. So for you, this must have been quite a learning experience for your future career.
I mean, these chaps are quite simple, but yes, I realised that I love the sound element of music making and music production. I love getting into the nitty gritty of it.
You could really find out what sounds could be made from synthesizers by doing this work, in a sense.
Yeah, and it was quite fresh then because there was a lot of the ground's been covered now. There's a billion sounds in sound libraries out there. But then it did feel very fresh. There was New Romantics were just sort of around the corner, and Gary Newman popularising the Moog. And we'd had the mini Moogs, and since 1968 or something, but they were tended to be for lead instruments or bass instruments, and then Joe Zawinul using that thing for the bass line on Birdland. But it was it's kind of most of the synths were in the progressive rock field in the 70s, and then when the kind of new romantics and the whole electronic stuff sort of blossomed at the end of the 70s, early 80s, I felt like there was sort of fresh ground being made. And in fact, most of the 80s, it felt like that to me. There's, you were doing something, and then there was no one had ever done that before, and that was exciting. We're opening up a new avenue of sound.
Did you find that you were listening to music in a sort of different way once you really got into the technical aspect of it?
Yeah. And you do have to I did find there was different ways. I switched on different ways of listening. Sometimes it was just entertainment, but you could sort of say, right, I'm focusing now, and then let's listen to this. What's the EQ on the hi-hat, and what's the bass line on doing that. So there's different levels you can come in and listen, and there's a bit of a training in that in terms of what level am I listening to, and then of course ultimately you've got to stand back and say, well, what am I feeling from this? And that's the most important thing. So what's it actually doing to to the human?
So tell me about that. What are you feeling when you hear those different types of synthesized sounds?
Oh, that's a broad question. So there's a sort of dialogue you have with a piece of music. If you're getting into the detail, it feels like there's it always feels like there's it's like a platonic, the idea of the platonic solids. They're out there in the universe somewhere. There's a perfect cube and there's a perfect tetrahedron, and everything else isn't a kind of an approximation of it. And down here on the 3D, we don't get the perfection, but out there is perfection that can be ascribed to. And I've often felt, I think usually feel that with each sound, with each production, each song, there is a kind of perfect version of it out there that wants to be expressed. And so so if you can kind of tune into that and kind of ask him, what is it you want from this, and try to channel that to get as deep a possible connection you can with that pureness of the track. That's quite a long sentence. I'm not quite sure how to finish that sentence. So it depends on each piece of music and each song, but there is something always to be aspired to if it's going to be anything decent. I mean, you can chuck sounds together randomly and see where it goes, but that can meander off into a bit of nothingness most times, I find.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to come back to that later because I find that idea really fascinating because, you obviously became a producer later and you're working with artists who have their own vision. So I want to sort of get to that later and how that works together. But first of all, when this job ended, did you feel there was a world out there that could use or even need your talent?
I had a little project going in Oxford. I don't think I was terribly confident. I mean, it wasn't. I wasn't as good as the records I was listening to, but I was still loving it and I was excited by it. And we made had a project with a singer who was I met in Oxford, and we made a little demo, and I think we were demo of the month at one of the magazines. So we did. So that was promising, and then. We decided to move to London. I think I felt that we needed some more input in the band, and I don't think there was anyone in Oxford I knew who could fill in the gap. So we both moved to London. The project didn't go anywhere.
Sorry, who's the we?
So the singer was Vicky Licorice. She was also studying at Oxford. She went on to have a sort of an acting and presenting career. She did Saturday Morning Superstore in the end of the 80s. I don't know if you remember that. She was one of the presenters on that. And
but one of the first artists you worked with was Danielle Dax, wasn't it?
Indeed, yes. You discovered her.
Yeah.
So
tell me.
Yes. So I sort of fell into recording studios because I thought I should get a proper job. I was on the dole at the time, and there was an advert for a service engineer at Chase Musicians. They used to sell lovely synthesizers, which are very much in vogue at the moment. Lovely Oberheims and Rhodes chromas. My electronics wasn't good enough really to run the whole shop, so I didn't get that job. But the guy who was interviewing us was just about to go. He had an interest in I think he co-owned a little 8-track studio just across the road in Euston. And he was just going to go off and tour with Jethro Tull as their keyboard tech. And the house engineer, Margot, she was going off to form Amazulu and have a pop career. And they were so they're desperately looking for someone to actually run the studio. And there's another interested party, but he was going off on holiday, so there was nobody there, and they had a diary full of bookings. And so bless him, Jamie, the guy who was interviewing me, a great friend for many years, decided to offer me a job as sort of house engineer, having, based on very little experience. So I get an afternoon's tuition on, there's a compressor, that's what it does, and there's a tape machine, that's how you line it up, and they're the keys, off you go. And so Monday came around, and I think we had a 10-pole Tudor came in, Ossibisa came in. So I used to lie awake at night thinking, oh my God, I don't know how to mic up a double bass. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. But it all worked out right.
There was a period does seem there's sort of a fairly, long period where you were working with Paul Staveley O'Duffy.
Indeed, yeah.
When did you meet him?
I was starting to produce records, and I realized that I really didn't know what I was doing at all. And I needed to learn computer music instruments specifically. There were Fairlights and things were coming in. I had a reasonable knowledge of analog synthesis, but people were using different tech by then. So I ended up in a studio in Chiswick it was called Paradise Studios, and they had a Fairlight, which this big classic sampling machine from the early 80s, and later on a PPG system with another computer attached to it, as well as a whole bunch of other synths. So I was working there as house engineer for about 3 years or so, and Paul came in to I think really to use the Fairlight. So we had one of the first things I think he did was it may not have been Swing Out Sister, but Swing Out Sister was certainly one of the early ones he did. And bless him, he took me around when I then went freelance, and he took me to Los Angeles and all around London, doing all these different projects as his kind of programmer and assistant.
You were the synthesizer programmer, I believe. And of course, the album that you worked on, It's Better to Travel, had Breakout on it, which was a completely massive hit. How did being part of that change things for you, or did it at that point?
It was nice to have some chart recognition. I mean, I had a sort of I'd been in the charts with a couple of other things I'd mixed prior to that, but they were kind of fairly fleeting. There was a sort of medley of funkadelic covers that got into the number 17 or something, and then disappeared. And there's another single from by Lady's Choice, I think that it had a chart appearance. But then I had a girlfriend, and I was traveling in her dad's car, and then Breakout came out on the radio, and suddenly I felt like, I sort of arrived a little bit. I'm actually in the flow of things now. So,
well, tell me about when you were working on those tracks for Swing Out Sister. Tell me about how it operated and what the role between the producer, who I presume was Paul, and your role as synthesizer programmer and the band, and how that sort of operated, and who had the power, or how this collaboration would work.
Well, with Paul, he's full of ideas, and so he was definitely the boss. I mean, he was good. He was also good at collaborating with the the act. So my role was fairly humble in comparison with his and what I went on to do a bit later. So I would be kind of assisting on all the sounds. We'd say we kind of want a sort of bass sound for this, so I'd rustle up a whole bunch of options and make suggestions. Well, it could go that way, and he'd kind of filter them and sieve them and make some suggestions, and we could proceed that way. So, but I was very much in service of his vision on those albums. I would say.
So it wasn't a point where you was, what you were saying earlier about these sort of shapes of sounds being out in the universe, and you need to bring the perfect ones to the track. That wasn't at that point that was sort of making sense, but you were working for his vision rather than yours.
Yes, I mean, in those projects, I was sort of trying to. I was doing some other productions as well on my own, and that's when I was starting to kind of develop that kind of that thesis.
So tell me about those.
Oh, I've got to thank Simon Napier Bell, bless him, because he's. I was working with a songwriter called David Tate, who wasn't a musician at all. So he'd come in and was going da 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 da, and so I have to work out what sort of chords he kind of had in his head, and I'll do all the arrangement with him, and he caught Simon Napier Bell's ear, and Simon was putting together a kind of what he hoped would be kind of like a British Motown, where there's like different artists would sing on each other's records, and he took David's songs as kind of the repertoire, and because there's nobody else, I was doing all the music. We had four artists on the label. So I sort of learned how not to do it on Simon's time, bless him. So we had some fairly amateurish records that came out and didn't really bother the charts at all. And I was working with another friend, Francis Asmar, who's another producer who originally booked me as an engineer programmer, but then we became a team. And we produced a bunch of other records together. And there was one record, I think we were some studio down the M4. I can't remember what it was, some famous studio. I can't remember. But there was we were there, and the track wasn't working, and that was the kind of moment. I just went outside and lay on the grass. It was like 1 a.m. or something like this, and the track wasn't working, and that was the kind of moment when I sort of took the time to ask what is this song about? What's it need? And then because of the answer sort of filtered in, and I was able to go and come back and put it. And it was a brass part. That's what it needed. So we did mocked up a brass part, and it was a much better record because of that.
Don't go away. The interview with Martyn Phillips continues in a moment. Just time for me to ask you to please like, subscribe, follow, whatever you want. Just support the podcast. Watch all the old interviews that I've done, about 120 of them now, on popthehistorymakers.com. So let's get back to Martyn, who talks about right now the difference between music, how he saw it in that sort of 80s period from the late 70s to 92, and how it is today.
I mean, that time was a very exciting time in music. We had all the acid house and the deep house bubbling away, and there was a lot of stuff, a lot of interesting world music going on. It was a very potent time, and I got very infected by all of that, and as did John and Steve. We started off working with putting Paul in the production seat, and we did what's the track called? I can't remember. Well, the first single Paul did, and John.
Your Love Takes Me Higher, was it that one?
Thank you very much. And John was especially connecting with club culture at that time, and we were kind of on a pretty similar wavelength. We were both getting very excited by what was going on in the music. And Paul was following, ploughing his own furrow, and the band wanted to go somewhere else. Meanwhile, I'd also been producing a casa, which is like an Indo fusion band. The two of the people who'd been in Monsoon with Sheila Chandra wanted to kind of redo that project, so they found another singer, and I love love the track. So I'd been kind of producing that to sort of build up my portfolio, as it were. So they heard what I'd been doing with the casa, which we also got signed to the Beloved's record label later on. So that gave them the confidence that I could actually complete a track. And I was obviously on the same wavelength, so they invited me to finish off the record with them, because I had really no idea whether I had what it takes to actually make a successful record. But we just did my best, and tried to tune into what John and Steve were doing. John would go out clubbing at the weekends and come in on a Monday late morning, and it was always the same. He's saying, "Oh, I feel so shit," because he's coming, big downer after the weekend. But what had infused his weekend sort of came out in the tracks during the week. So we were able to sort of harmonize that into their kind of indie sound as well. So it was a lovely mixture of the sort of the indie, their indie roots, and the club culture, and little bits of world music popping in there as well. For me, the highlight was doing the sun rising. That was really quite magical. It was quite a magical recording process, but then when we got round to mixing it, we were on a very big mixing console, where you could basically do a mix on that, and then you could monitor another track over here. So we'd mix the sun rising and thought, okay, let's just work on another track. So we did that, and we came back to the mix, and it was quite late at night, and decided, oh no, this is not right. We can still do better. So we kind of picked up the mantle again and worked all through the night, and it was sort of, we were actually mixing it manually, 6 hands on the desk, pressing buttons, with no computer on that. So we were actually mixing that as the sun was rising over West London. So there was a real sort of magic in the air on that tune.
John came in, after a weekend partying and a bit worse for wear, and he came up with these ideas. Were you, in a sense, because you were working at different hours as well? I mean, you were working with him. I presume he had to go off and sleep at some point. So you had also time alone to experiment and change things and find something else on the track.
The Beloved, I think we were all there most of the time. I didn't go and take it off into different directions without them. I mean, every time I did, I did try, and then John said, "Oh, no," and then we go around there. So I sort of, I stayed on board with their vision rather than trying to take it off elsewhere. When we got round to doing the remix album, Blissed Out, which is taking the tracks off Happiness, which is the album we're talking about, and doing remixes of them, there was more fluidity there. I was able to sort of program up some stuff and try things out, and I think we were all feeling a bit more confident by then.
The Beloved were groundbreaking in a lot of ways. I mean, not just musically, visually, also in a sense lyrically. I mean, Hello was, quite a sort of crazy track which caught everyone immediately. How did you feel when he came in with that idea?
Well, he wasn't very sure at all. I mean, he came in and said, "Oh, I've got this idea for this track. I'm not sure it's any good. It's kind of basically a list of names." And it was brilliant. So I said, "No, it's great. Let's do it." So we did. Rewind back to 1983 when I was working in another little 8-track studio, and a-ha were demoing their first record overnight. So they were managed by the studio owner. So I was the day engineer, and they would come in at night. And there's something, I think it's more. So I was the first person to kind of hear all their tunes in the morning when they finished that. And there's something Morten said. A track's always got to make you smile somewhere. So it's sort of, and it can be a funny, funny ha ha, which is a little bit with hello, or it can be a sort of wry smile, or it can. There's got to be a smile somewhere. And with hello, there definitely is, because it's funny. It is with ridiculous juxtapositions. Zippy Bungle, Jeffrey Archer. What a juxtaposition.
In terms of actually dealing with artists, and how do you give them enough space, but also, in a sense, keep them on board? Is there some sort of approach that you need to have as a producer to do that?
It depends very much on the individuals involved. There's strong character, and then there's collaborative characters, and there's the people who don't really know what they want, so they need more guidance. So it's always the producer's job to finish off the job, whatever it takes, and if, it can be a job of just saying, "Oh, it sounds great, guys," or it can be just doing everything. It's always much more rewarding if there's a collaboration, and then I always go for consensus and trying to get a shared vision of where we're going, and keeping that sort of that spark of what it should be still alive inside. When the occasions did arise where there was just different ideas, someone says it's got to be like this, or whatever, I would. The backstop is to say, well, look, guys, I've got to mix this. It's got to make sense to me. If it doesn't make sense to me, it's going to be rubbish. So we need to find a consensus, or it needs to be sufficiently my vision that I can understand what's going on here. Thinking about it was a big one of that. There were 3 other versions we did of that before we ended up with the final one. There was we tried to do the demo. And then we tried 2 other ones, which are sort of slightly funky. And at the end, there was a track on the album called "Keep It Simple, Stupid," KISS. And I sort of took that as a mantra. I said, "Oh, we just need to. It's got to be simple. It's got to be straightforward. It's got to be beautiful." And so we did. The simple bass line, 4 on the floor, but sensitive parts. I changed the chords. I just made it kind of straightforward and uncomplicated. So that was something where I sort of did need to steer it away from where the band had wanted it. But they liked where it was going, so they were happy to go along with it.
Wasn't it also a case of steering it away from where the record company wanted to go?
On that one,
I think Jimmy mentioned that to me, something about that the record company wanted something, and what happened was that you went back into the studio and basically sent the same track back to the record company, and they went, "Oh, that's great."
I don't remember that. It's quite possible. It's the classic producer's trick, isn't it? Of just going when someone walks in and says, "No, I'm not quite sure about that." Oh no, okay, I know what you want. There you go. How's that? Yeah, it's much better. Press it, changing all the tracks that are not engaged at all. Did
you know that when you first heard a track like "Thinking About You," you would instantly know, wow, this could be massive? Could you tell?
We're thinking about it. It was obviously a single, but it had a completely different arrangement, different chords. But it was, it was a good same top line. I didn't change the lyrics or the melody. It felt it had potential, but it didn't. And there's obviously going to be a single, but it wasn't the thing it was meant to be at that point. You're right. The stars were very much aligned at that point. Later on in life, I had a look at where all the stars were, and they're all in my birth sign of Sagittarius. And there were those 3 or 4 years where I was extremely blessed. And while we were doing the Londonbeat album, I still hadn't signed the contract, and somehow I got to hear Right Here, Right Now demo from Jesus Jones. So I said to Londonbeat, "I'm sorry guys, I've just got to take time out and do this." And they were, of course, weren't happy at all about that. But I said, "Look, it's only one track. I'll be back in a week or 10 days or something like that." And they asked my friend Charles Pierre, who's now in the band, now in Londonbeat, to come in, and he worked on one of the tunes while I was away. And I went off and worked with Mike on that track. And that I knew that hit the zeitgeist so perfectly. with the Berlin Wall falling down and the sense that things were going to change. There's a real sense of optimism. Mike's really strong delivery and positivity on that. So that I knew was going to be should have been a hit, and it was.
When you hear those aspects that you just mentioned on a track, do you see it then as your job to bring those to the fore, to make sure that they're really present? I mean, I remember that track, and it was exactly this feeling that things are now going to be good. It's all going to change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's making it what it wants to be. If it's already what it should be, then I would say I wouldn't be the right producer, because I'll just make it worse. So there's always got to be this sense that there's great potential in there, but it hasn't quite been realised. So I feel I can guide it into its docking bay to be what it wants to be.
Is there significant pressure that comes on you when the Londonbeat one, I think, was number one on the Billboard chart in America? Jesus Jones, that was worldwide as well. So there you are, you're behind the massive hits of the time. And I would have thought then not only are you, everyone wants to work with you, but also there is a massive pressure on you to repeat success. And repeating success is never easy.
Did I feel massive pressure? I mean, I felt quite blessed. And it's when you're in the producer chair, I mean, you're not sort of in front of screaming thousands going, listen to your music. You just, I've just come back to the same amazing net I lived in. And it's still, this carpet still was dirty and needed sweeping or something. And there was no one there to greet me and say, hey, you're number one. I'll tell Tom, come in, and my girlfriend, hey, guess who's number one in America? I am, but that was it. So, and then we just get on with doing the next tunes. I mean, there was more Londonbeat stuff to do.
Do you do any research for these artists when you find out you're going to work with them? Do you actually, I mean, some of them you worked at the beginning, so it's difficult to say, but do you actually sort of look into exactly what they've done, where they are, who they are, or do you go in blind, fresh?
Yeah, not comprehensive, because you can get too immersed in their story and then you don't want to change anything. So enough to kind of get, where they've come from and a sense of what can be improved and, where we could possibly go with it. So yes, but yeah, not too much, because you want to keep things fresh. I mean, working up to Erasure, that was quite a big one. So, I mean, thinking I did think that Stephen Hague did a lovely job on like Ship of Fools, and there was a lovely feeling on that. I'm thinking, well, can I do something as good as that with the brief that Vince had set me.
But tell me, what brief did he set you?
Vince had, famously started off with in Depeche Mode, where it's all monophonic analog synthesizers, all quite bleepy, and then his brilliant work with his Yazoo was the same kind of thing. It was all monophonic lines, and he'd sort of strayed from that path with the early Erasure records and was starting to use presets. And actually, we wasn't confident in that he could sort of go back to those roots and make a pop record with just analog synthesizers. And so he liked what I'd done with The Beloved. And then Daniel Miller, of course, liked what I'd done with commercially with Londonbeat. So I had the record company and the band kind of on my side. And so Vince, I think, thought I'd be a good ally to sort of help make sure that he could remember what he was doing. And we did, I did programming on the record as well. So we had sort of competitions on who could make the most complicated patch for a part. But I mean, very much led by Vince, but I would sort of chip in when he thought, I don't know what to do here, or gave up on something. I'd have a go. So the brief was to make a pop record with only analog monophonic synthesizers, with no playing, no MIDI, so it was all sort of CV and gates with old MC4 sequences. No presets, so every sound was from scratch, and everything was sequenced on a sequencer, or just out of shot here. I'll just drag one in.
Ah,
That's it.
okay.
Oh, it was an ARP sequencer. We had two of those running, so they were providing a lot of the music. And bless him, he was confident that we could do a record like this, and I thought, okay, well let's have a go. I'm not so sure, you know. And we had a little trial session in Brussels, was it? I think it was. We did started off on "Turn the Love to Anger." That was the track we started off, and that went well. So they booked me in, and we recamped to Toulouse because they were taking a taxi out. And we spent a bit of time there, and that was a little bit arduous. And then came back for Christmas, and then went up to Hamburg to Chateau du Pape. It was a great studio, and then things went swimmingly there. It was really, wonderful session, and it was. I think it was the last time that the two were kind of in the same place at the same time. So I had this lovely job of kind of bridging Vince's world, which is all numbers and 64, 73, 82 for filter settings, with Andy's very sort of flamboyant view of the world. So I was, referencing La Belle et les Bêtes and classic early. The Singing Ringing Tree, that was one. It's, I don't know if you know that. It's kind of it used to get shown on the BBC. It was I think it's a German black and white fantasy thing from the 50s, but it was really evocative, and it brought sort of magic of all those sort of German fairy stories to life. And that was kind of a reference that I would use with Andy, and then sort of bring that back and trying to marry that up with Vince's technical stuff. So, and also Andy was Vince was on a 24-hour clock, but Andy was on like a 28-hour day, because he'd go out clubbing and then it could be later and later. So he'd start off turning up at 10 o'clock, then it'd be 12 o'clock, then it'd be 2, and then so halfway through the album he was completely out of sync with Vince. So I'd be have a day with Vince and then have most of the night with working on Andy's vocals, and again they get back into sync before the end of the album, be in the same place at the same time.
That sounds fascinating, that you have these two people in a band who have, I mean, obviously they get on well, but they have totally different characteristics really as people, and maybe their way of working is completely different. Like you said, that there's one who's partying and coming in late, and the other one who's more present, let's say, and that really shows your maturity in being able to deal with and connect to different characters. Do you think that is also the secret of being a successful producer?
I mean, it can be, of course. There's many ways you can produce a record. You can be authoritarian, or and it's just much more fun when you're in a collaboration, I think, and you're just creating something together as a team. So yeah, I like to think I get on with the artists I've worked with, and most of them have remained friends over the years. So that's the joy of being a collaboration. And I think when we all retreated to our home studios, as most of us did in the early 90s, it became less fun working remotely when you just send tracks off and you're only collaborating virtually. And so I do miss that sense of collaboration that we had, being living in the same space.
I mean, one track that came out of your work with Erasure was, of course, Love to Hate You, which was one of their biggest successes. Can you tell me specifically about making that track?
So that was typically that wasn't taken seriously. It was meant to be a B-side because it's like a silly kind of mistake of "I Will Survive." It's sort of very reminiscent of that. The melody, it's not a copy, but reminiscent of it. Um, and again, it was like so many of the successful records. It's actually quite straightforward to make. It's sort of, the steps are not convoluted at all. Vince had that melody. I felt that it needed to have a sort of live feel, so we stole some crowd noises and put that in, and it's such a cheap trick, to do that, but it does work. It makes you feel, oh, I'm in there, right. Give it a false live feel. But I mean, pop music is a cheap trick, really, isn't it? Generally, I did contribute that little because I felt that it needed that little sort of cheeky reply to Andy's vocals. So that was one of my suggestions, I seem to remember.
No, that added a sense of drama, didn't it, as well, to the whole thing. It feels like that technology was a sort of trigger to your career, and in a sense, technology shaped your success. What happened to the music world at this time, which meant that you were no longer so present?
I mean, it's such a cliche, but you ride a wave, don't you? You're up there, and then you're visible. So what you're doing does actually infuse what everyone else is doing. So you could kind of being a part of and contributing to the sounds of that time meant that the more you did what you were doing was current, and things did move on. I got a little lost because I got so fed up with lugging all my synths around from studio to studio and plugging it up every day. I thought, right, when there was a little bit of money from the royalties coming in, I said, right, I'm going to build my own studio. So I built a nice little studio in my house. But then, of course, you got to be purchaser, you got to be tape op, you got to be service engineer, and it's never going to be as good as Psalm West. So it was a good time where I was struggling kind of in the wrong area to make music, and it became, even though I didn't have to lug I could just start making music in my dressing gown. It was still hard work to try to get something that sounded professional. So I perhaps jumped ship a bit too early, because my colleagues were still going around the big studios and getting assistance from all the staff there. And I was sort of trying other things out which perhaps didn't work so well. I did one little thing sort of early when sort of jungle music was coming out. I thought, this is gonna turn commercial, so I'll try to do some sort of pop jungle-y kind of thing. And I had a little outfit there, and we did a couple of singles. And of course, it didn't. It stayed underground and cool. It didn't get compromised in the way that I thought it might do. And then I suppose I got lost a few other things. Other things going on in life. Bit of a spiritual awakening, perhaps you might say, or just kind of want to know what else is going on in the universe. So I got a bit distracted for a while, and when I sort of got back into it, the people had moved on, and I wasn't so excited by what was happening musically. There was, I felt there was kind of a cut-off point, 92, 93, where I probably use the word wrong, but everything became sort of postmodern. Then I felt that everything was kind of a synthesis of what had been before. Maybe it was just my naivety and everything in the 80s. I had been as well, but I was too. I didn't realise that the Beatles had contributed so much, But by the time we were into Oasis and Blur, I thought, well, I can't have done this, and all this sort of wasn't excited by house music anymore. It seemed a bit of a rehash of, and it still feels like we're still we're still doing the same thing 30 years later. So the freshness had gone out of that. So I was just sort of trying different avenues, and much of that was not so commercially rewarding, certainly. I suppose the one thing that I could think has I really enjoyed over the years is drum and bass, and that's still around, and that's sort of. And I haven't made much drum and bass, but I do enjoy it, and that's the one genre I think I would say has excited me since 1993. But to go back to technology, yes, I mean I do love what you can do with sound. I love exploring new little sonic avenues. Be a big new. Can we take the sound off there? What can we do with this tool? And it still excites me. I mean, what you can do with sound now is extraordinary. With we had Melodyne came out a while ago where you could forensically take apart a vocal and split it up and address different aspects of a single vocal. And now we got stem separation where you can disassemble your favorite records and remix and mash them up or improve them. You can say, well, I'd had a little play around recently with what was it? I was trying to think of what's the worst recorded record and see if I could re-engineer it by stem splitting it. So yes, technology. I love that exploration, and that's perhaps a fault because I get too involved. Secondly, it's got such a broad base now, and there's so much to play with and learn from. Even though the principles are the same, I often get lost in the woods and don't see the forest.
I know music doesn't work in terms of decades, and you did mention, and I think there is an era, and maybe because I'm closely connected to it, but there's an era of late 70s where, the electronic stuff really came up and was successful. And we did move in right to where you said to sort of 93. And that for me is a sort of 80s decade with the overlaps in the 90s and at the end of the 70s. Why is that era so prevalent even today? It does feel like that it never goes away.
There's the financial argument that CDs, of course, were coming in early 80s, so people were rebuying their record collection, listening to it in a different way, and refinancing the record companies that could then spend the money into allowing bands to re-record, to spend time refining their art and recording what they wanted to. I suppose that's the easy answer. There's there's probably more esoteric answers about the changes of the era, the times, and I'm not quite sure how you'd map that. As I say, when I was trying to assess why I had such a great period, end of the 80s, early 90s, as I was looking at this trilogy, things did literally line up, and things and then got more dispersed. So there was that sense of cohesion, and everything was kind of building up to that. I suppose there's lots of cultural reasons, aren't there? There's the expansion of the 60s and the and LSD and the explosion of consciousness that was there, and how that had a fallout in all of the extensive music of the 70s, and how they were able to embrace the changing technology and harness that. The Pink Floyd records and Genesis, all the prog rocks, and then the cultural backlash for that gave us all this wonderful punk and post-punk new age, all that fantastic energy that got re-injected into that Thatcherite Britain, the sense of frustration and anger that was manifest in the music. And then we didn't have video games so much, and there were video consoles in the pubs, but people didn't get lost playing games, and there wasn't all that visual stimulus that kids have today on the internet, with what you're watching now on YouTube and TikTok and the reduction of attention spans. Sitting down and listening to a record, that's became less and less accessible. Then I suppose there's another answer, is the switch from analog to digital. I had this sort of, well, there's a feeling you get with analog. It's such a cliche now. So you put a record on, and there's something that your body responds to, or something deeper responds to, your soul, whatever it is, responds to. If you play the CD of the same thing, even if it's from the same analog master, it's a different experience. You say, "Oh, I like this. I can hear that," but you stop saying, "Oh, I'm feeling great about this. I feel really connecting with that." And as more of the music became digital, there's less and less of that analog connection. And I've got this sort of idea that with analog, of course, you've got like a one-to-one correspondence at every link of the chain. You've got the vibrations in the air and the vibrations in the microphone. There's which convert to electrical signals, electrical waves like this, which correspond to magnetic waves on the tape, and then back through the speaker, the transducers to your ears. There's a connection physically, which I think is also an energetic connection. And as you introduce more digital elements, where like the random where you just take the sound and you put a bit there, and we've got some spare memory over there, so I've chuck it over there, and another bit there. Then suddenly you've lost that one-to-one correspondence, and so I think like there's a spirit of the track that gets lost. It's out there somewhere. There's a soul there's a soul disconnection somewhere.
Don't go away. Martyn Phillips will talk a bit more in depth about how music affects our bodies and our psyche. And don't forget, if you want to watch other interviews, they're on popthehistorymakers.com. There's about 120 of them. And if you want to support the podcast, please like, subscribe, follow, whatever you have to do. You can even find me on Instagram at steve.blaine. Okay, back to Martyn Phillips.
I do hope so. I mean, I think there's a great dividing of the ways. It's quite biblical at the moment, isn't there? The goats and sheep, and I don't know how far down that hole you you want to, you find yourself. I mean, there's. I don't think we're going to get that mass acceptance culturally that we did, as we did in the 70s when music was really important. There are positive signs. I mean, there's more and more people abandoning 440 hertz as a reference. So if that means, I'll explain. So when we make music, we usually reference the A note to 440 cycles per second. It's 440. And then it's been like that most of the 20th century. And the conspiracists would say that that's all a part of the plot, because when you have music in those frequencies, you connect with it mentally and you connect with it sexually, but there's very little heart, and it's not a full spectrum experience in the way that if you reference to, for instance, 532 or 428, the different references, and they access the atoms, the molecules in your body, so that things are vibrating in a different way. And there's a movement away from 440 into 432 referenced music. Tom Petty was doing it, and Vivaldi was meant to have done it, but I don't think he did. And that opens up the door to some of this sense of reconnecting with the soul of music, I feel. And different aspects of what music can be. Rock and roll has been very dominated by 440, and it's sex and head, but it's not so much heart. But I don't know how we're going to, transcend this technical barrier that we've got with digital now. People are buying vinyl again. And so there are steps in that right direction, but I think it is a dividing of the world. Some people are going to connect with it and get a deeper experience, and many are just going to be stick to their TikTok and their visual stimulation. one of the other pluses is, of course, it's so much easier to make music now than it was, and it's so much more accessible. So I think those that want to listen will be able to find decent music that can be made made at a much more accessible budget by musicians, and the technology is so accessible that people can do it themselves now.
I mean, one thing that's always fascinated me about music is that I've always felt that the pain or the childhood trauma of an artist is often what goes into their music. And as a listener, or then I listen to that music, and my childhood trauma, which won't be the same, but somehow how I've put it into my psyche relates to theirs, and that's our connection through the music.
We're exercising our demons through art. Oh yeah, we're exposing them and giving them freedom and saying, yes, I don't need to feel traumatized about that anymore. Yeah.
You're saying that there's also the other aspect, which is to do with the frequency and not just to do with the artist's trauma. There are two aspects within this.
Well, with the art, there will have been someone making that record who's felt that that's what needs to be done. That's I like it. You're connecting with what they got often when they were making the record on their big KRKs or whatever they had in their studio. And they will have tested. If it's half decent, they will have tested it out in their club and think, yeah, this is it. This is banging tune. This is doing it for me. Music is the primal language, isn't it? It was around before we were talking. It's the original language that before the Tower of Babel divided us and into our individual dialects and languages. We were singing before we were talking. There must have been a great complexity and detail in the way that we were communicating when we were musicking to each other. I was chatting to us, lovely. He was an expert on Celtic history, and he said that when the Celtic armies used to go to battle, they'd line up against each other, and they're getting ready and sharpening their swords. Then they're sending in musicians. The musicians would have a little jam in what was going to be the battlefield, and the musicians would decide if there's anything to be fought over. They'd have a little dialogue and say, no, we were speaking the same language. There's nothing to fight about, guys. Go home. And if the musicians couldn't find that central communication, right, so may the best side win.
Well, it's been brilliant talking to you, Martyn Phillips, and I want to thank you at the end, because I think it's really important to thank people who have contributed so much to the culture, and for me, to songs that have meant so much for me in my life. And it's great to see you again, although I didn't know you were on the bus, and I don't think you really knew I was on the bus, but it was a brilliant party. Thanks very much, Martyn.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. I'm with a donkey.
Up there is an interview I recommend. Down there is where you can find all the podcast interviews. And here is where you can connect.